Welcome back to Close Up. We're excited to welcome back to the studio the political guru of New Hampshire himself, former state AG and sage of many a Republican presidential campaign, Tom Rath.
I feel so old. Thank you, Ed. Nice to be here.
A Close Up original, I've got to say. If you've been watching this program for a long time, Mr. Rath has been on the program for a long time. So you've seen so many of these. As this primary starts to get underway on the Republican side, how do you assess the field that's emerging and how this cycle might turn out?
Well, you know, I think early on the coverage is going to be dominated by the former president. And when Trump gets in, it's a question of if, I guess he is in, it's a question of how much he can hold together. The great imponderable that I've never seen in one of our primaries is we may have a favorite son. And I actually, I have no stock in this whatsoever. I think Chris Sununu would really add a lot to that field. And if he gets in, it changes this primary significantly. He will not have a cakewalk here. He'll have to compete for votes here. But in the meantime, I think you're seeing the field kind of align, not ideologically, but almost personality-wise, between the dominant personality of Trump and his sort of opponent du jour, which is DeSantis. I think the field is much deeper than those two. And I think as the race develops, you'll see others that are in that race or getting in that race begin to emerge. I think the polling reflects those two people because they're well known. There's some real talent in this field that's much deeper than those two people.
If you're advising one of these Republicans who's going to take on or thinking about taking on President Trump, how do you think they should approach this? Because all of the strategies did not work in 15 and 16.
Right, but then was then and now is now. And you can't go back to an era that once existed. I think you've got to be prospective in your approach. It's not what I did then, it's what are you going to do now? How do you fit into this construct? How do you deal with this Congress? How do you deal with the issues this country's facing? And Donald Trump is becoming yesterday's news. It's been 6 years since he's been in office. I mean, it's changing greatly what's happening. I think in New Hampshire, because of the nature of our primary, it's a great place to stop him if you want to stop him. Because I do not believe there will be a Democratic primary. I believe the president will run and he will basically be unopposed. So as you know, that frees up a lot of votes in New Hampshire. Well, independents can come in the day of the election, the day of the primary, and say, I want a Republican ballot. And that changes in a lot of ways how we vote. So I think there's opportunity here for a lot of folks. And obviously I'm promoting New Hampshire, but I do think this is a good state. The state loves to play, loves to be interested. You can draw crowds. I think the press will take it seriously. I think the Democrats, the DNC made a terrible mistake allowing the Republicans this stage to themselves for as long as they'll have it.
Right. More on that in a minute, but let's circle back to Governor Sununu. It seems like you were one of the earliest to pick up on his kind of innate knack for understanding New Hampshire politics and how to operate here. It's one thing to sort of know a state, to then expand that to a 50-state thing and be able to make that work elsewhere. Do you think he plays outside of New England? Because we have such a niche kind of Republican here. It's tough for somebody like that to go to an Iowa or South Carolina, especially where it's so evangelical, and connect.
I think the difference is it's not just what he does, but how he does it. He has an inclusiveness, he has an energy. He doesn't look at problems and say, oh, poor us. He looks at problems and says, how do we fix this? How do we move forward? His instinct is to be inclusive. His instinct is to govern with a smile, not a scowl. I think he will travel well should he decide to do it. Having said that, he would obviously, because he's really smart, the people around him are really smart, it's not a slam dunk. It's going to be very, very difficult. But if the race is between Trump and DeSantis to see who succeeds there, the other race is who breaks through from the rest of the crowd. And when I look at that crowd, I think Chris Sununu would do very well.
Do you worry, though, that there's the potential that he could, it might be a spoiler, but it's like the idea of having a favorite son, that it might scare off other candidates who could take on Trump?
Well, I think that's a fair comment, and I think he's going to have to factor that in. What I think he would find is that he may think he's the favorite son, but the voters of New Hampshire don't. Voters of New Hampshire is like a test. Now, they know him well, and I think he's going to have great resilience here. But it's not a slam dunk, and he knows it, and he'll go out and try to earn those votes if he gets in. And I really don't have any idea whether he's going to get in or not.
As you've noted, it's not always the best place to be is the top of the polls a year out from the primary. In fact, very rarely do we see that person go on to become the
And I think that's what you have to look at beyond Trump and beyond DeSantis is who's in that other group.
So throw us a name here. Who, other than Sununu, who do you see right now who could break through?
Well, I'm intrigued by some of the folks like Governor Haley did very, very well. I chatted with the folks before they came in. I don't think they expected the reaction they got. I know the national press picked up on her quite a bit. I think there's a couple of other governors out there who are looking at it. I think there's a lot of folks that want to play. Whether they get into it, I mean, my old friend John Kasich is clearly a name that still comes up. I don't know where it'll come from, but there will be people there, not necessarily in the United States Senate, that want to get in this.
Right. As a practitioner of politics, how do you assess sort of the current health of the Republican Party? There's so much energy, but there's no cohesiveness to it. And you can have these candidates like there's the style of the Sununu, there's a style of a Trump. You know, it's hard to say where things are going.
Well, I'm concerned that there is a piece of our party that is forever angry and, frankly, forever nasty. And I think we have to get away from that. We have to remember, it's one thing to be a political party. It's another thing to be a governing party. And I think we have to show that we can make that transition. And we have to get away from the sort of inter-party back and forth and get to understand how the American people are living and what are their concerns right now. They're not necessarily how many angels can dance on the head of a conservative pin. And I think we have to broaden.
And certainly both parties are dealing with these issues of polarization and moving farther and farther away from where the mass of American votes are there in the middle.
I firmly straddle the middle. I think the middle is where most people are. The middle is where you govern from. And I think we have to remember that they have a voice too. Primaries tend to play on the edges. General elections are fought in the middle. So when you're doing a primary, you're trying to pick a candidate for the general election, you've got to think, how does this person get from where they are to the middle?
What do you think about what the Democrats have done in terms of the DNC? I know that you've seen a lot of primaries and a lot of fights here. This seems like it's going a little bit farther than it ever has.
Oh, it does.
Are they going to pay a price here locally?
I think they pay a big price. First of all, they give a great stage to the Republicans. This is a state, by the way, we have 4 electoral votes. People tend to forget that. They put them in jeopardy. I don't know why the president won the election here. He won the general election. He did badly in the primary, but he did badly in all the early primaries. Why go to South Carolina, which is pretty much going to be the delegates anyways? It doesn't make sense to me. I know there's a bigger agenda out there. I fought it for 10 years on the RNC. A couple of times I thought we were going to lose it, but we stepped in at the last minute and saved it. I think our folks on the DNC are doing the best they can. They're up against it. I think the best way to do it now is take the rules as it is, have a primary here. I think they'll put them on the ballot, and they'll not campaign here at their peril.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that this won't really resolve itself until there's a candidate who comes and wins New Hampshire and becomes president and essentially restores.
That's exactly right.
That too.
I think that's where it's headed.
Although, do you think that there's something should be done at the state level, that perhaps there's legislation needed to, with this ballot access issue? The DNC is going to do everything it can to try and keep people off the ballot. Does something need to be done to make it easier to get names onto that ballot so the ballot essentially reflects the national mood or the national field? Because it feels like if the DNC manages to scare people off from running here, that's a big win for them.
Well, yeah, it is, but it's a Pyrrhic victory. I'm not sure in the end what mattered to win the thing and lose your soul. I think there will be a compensation for this some point, and it'll be done by the general electorate. I think that they will find that they have made themselves so narrow that the New Hampshire Democrats, who I have a huge amount of respect for, they'll finally be able to say to the DNC, see, we told you this was going to happen. Why did you do this? Primaries are best left the way they have been, where states make their own decisions about how they want to go forward. Trying to micromanage it from a DNC or an RNC is wrong, and it's destined to fail.
Yeah, it seems like that top-down. In the past, it hasn't worked, and it may not work again. Are you an optimist about this, though, on the future of the primary?
Oh, yes. I mean, look at we've been kicked around a lot, and the old dog still comes back, and there is such an acceptance. One of the things with Governor Haley was here, several, we would call it big feet of the national press. We had lunch or coffee and stuff. They want New Hampshire. They understand New Hampshire. They believe the test that New Hampshire puts people through, sitting across a table as opposed to always in, frankly, the TV studio. They like that. They understand it. They get it. I think we've got a few laps left.
All right. Tom Rath, Republican political guru, thanks for joining us here on Close Up.
Good to be back, Adam. Thank you.
Appreciate the time.